So now we'll delve into animation. And this will be a fairly brief tutorial because, well, animation takes years to master and grows increasingly complex as you get into character animation, which also entails relaying emotional content through acting and storytelling, and then what's known as stochastic animation, which includes dynamics like particles and cloth simulations and special effects such as water, fire effects. The theories and processes behind basic object animation, which is what you'll be sticking with in this course, are fairly straightforward. So you'll be working strictly with keyframe animation in your project. And in its most basic definition, a keyframe is a reservation in time and space. So when you set a keyframe on an object, you're telling the software that at this particular time, which we denote with frames along the timeline, and as we discussed back in Module 1, we're working with the frame rate for video, which is 30 frames per second. So at this particular time, this particular frame, you want to set a reservation for that object at this particular space, this particular location. And the location is the position, angle, and or scale in three-dimensional space, or the X, Y, and Z position, rotation, or scale. So here I've created a simple box, and I'm going to create some basic keyframe animation for it. As we discussed back in Module 1, there are two methods for setting keyframes: set key mode and auto key mode. In both set key mode and auto key mode, you always have to set the initial keyframe manually. So while in auto key mode, as you'll see here in a moment, moving, rotating, or scaling the object will automatically set an additional keyframe at the current frame, but only if you set an initial keyframe by clicking on the set key button or using the hotkey, the S key on your keyboard. So I've just created a simple box here, and I'm going to move it to where I want the animation to begin. And then I have to set the initial keyframe either by clicking on the set key button or pressing S on my keyboard, which is the hotkey. And you can see that a red, green, and blue tick mark appears on the timeline now to indicate that I've set a keyframe for the selected object at that particular frame. So what I've done here is I've told the software to set a keyframe, a reservation for this particular object at a specific time, in this case frame 1, with the box at this particular position, angle, and scale. If I had just set a keyframe for the position, you would see only a red tick mark. If I'd set a keyframe for only the rotation, you would see a green tick mark. And if I'd set a keyframe for only the scale, you would see only a blue tick mark. And I can select this keyframe and right-click to delete just the rotation or just the scale, and you would see that those colors would disappear from that tick mark. So if I work with set key mode, by clicking on the set key button, you'll see that will turn red to let you know that you're in set key mode. If I were to move my timeline to frame 30, which is halfway between the start and end of my timeline, and I move the box, and then scrub through the timeline again, you'll see it will snap back to its original position. Because I've set that initial keyframe in set key mode, in order to set that second keyframe at frame 30, I either need to click the set key button or press the S key on my keyboard. So now as I scrub through the timeline, you'll see that the software will interpolate the frames between the first and second keyframe, so that from frame 1 to frame 30, the box moves from its first position to its second position. And this is the order that you need to work in when animating. You change the time first, or change the frame that you're on the timeline, and then change the position, rotation, and or scale. With auto key mode enabled, so I'll click auto key now, and you'll see that that will turn red, and set key is disabled now. If I change my timeline to frame 60, and then I move the box again, you'll see that automatically that keyframe has been set. So I didn't have to set a new keyframe by pressing the set key button or by pressing S on my keyboard. In auto key mode, that keyframe is set automatically when you move, rotate, or scale the object to a new location, angle, or scale, as long as that initial keyframe has been set. So now I have a very simple animation of that box moving up and to the right, and then down again and to the right. So I'll turn off auto key mode. So when it comes time to edit your animation, you're going to be working with two editors, the dope sheet and the curve editor. Now try not to be offended by the name dope sheet. It's an homage to what keyframe animators in the early days of animation used for the diagrams they created to denote where the keys, breakdowns, and in-betweens should be for an animated performance for the artists that drew the in-betweens or the tweens, which had to be drawn by hand back then by artists known as in-betweeners. The dope sheet is how you'll adjust the timing of your keyframes. While you can also move keyframes by selecting the keyframes in the timeline and moving them, so I could select this keyframe and drag it to the left or right to change the frame at which it occurs. The dope sheet is the far better option to use once you begin creating more complex animations and you start working with more than one animated object. You can open the dope sheet from the Graph Editors menu. I'll just position it so that I can see the animation and the dope sheet at the same time. And on the left here will be a list of all of the objects and elements in your scene. So I'll scroll down to the bottom to find my box. And I just have the box in this scene, and you can see that's listed under Objects. And for my box here, you can see I have 3 keyframes, one at frame 1, one at frame 30, and one at frame 60. And I'm just going to play the animation for you so you can see what it looks like at its current state. Okay. And true to its name, the dope sheet is pretty simple. Moving keyframes to the left speeds up the animation. Moving keyframes to the right slows down the animation. So I'll move the keyframe at frame 30 to the left. And you'll see now when I play this back that the box will move quicker between the first and second positions, and then slow down between the second and third positions. And then conversely, moving keyframes to the right slows down your animation. So now when I move this keyframe to the right, you'll see now that the box will move slower between the first and second positions and more quickly between the second and third positions. The curve editor is how you'll adjust the motion or the poses of your animation. Again, you can open that from the graph editors menu. I find it easier to use the mini editor down here on the left. And just like the dope sheet, you'll find a list of all the objects and elements in your scene on the left-hand side. So I'll scroll down to find my box. You can see that there's a separate animation curve for each animated element. So in my case, I've animated just the movement of the box. So I have an animation curve for the X position, and it doesn't move in the X position because the X position is in this direction. I only animated it in the Y and the Z. So that's a flat animation curve. But I have the Y animation. The box starts over to the left and then moves linearly from the left to the right. That's why the animation curve for the Y position starts at the top and goes down to the right, because the vertical axis here in our graph represents the value. So this is the Y position from 0 in the positive direction here, negative direction down here. And the horizontal axis is the frames of the animation, or the timeline. So you'll see that the animation curve for the Z position starts at the bottom, moves up for the second keyframe, and then back down for the third keyframe, because the animation moves up and down, from low to high, and then from high to low. And this is a good way to demonstrate how the animation curves represent the motion that you're seeing, because the shape of this Z position matches exactly the shape that you see the box moving in the animation. Each keyframe here, which is represented by these gray boxes that turn white when you select them, each keyframe has a tangency that allows you to adjust the shape of the curve leading into and coming out of each keyframe. Now, there are many ways to adjust the motion of animated objects with the tangent handles, but for this course, we'll stick simply with moving the tangent handles on either side of each keyframe with the Move tool to adjust the movement of this particular animated object. So if I adjust the tangent handle, I can adjust the Z movement of the box so that the box moves in a steeper manner between the first and second keyframes, and then a more curved manner between the second and third keyframes. So I'll select this first keyframe, and then with the Move tool, I'll drag its handle to make it a bit steeper. And then I'll select the second keyframe and drag its handle down in this direction. So that the movement is steeper between the first and second keyframes and more curved between the second and third. So now if we play the animation, you'll see that it will move more quickly between the first keyframe and second keyframe, and a more curved manner between the second and third keyframes. To reset these, I just select all of the keyframes and press the auto button, which will automatically reset the tangents. So now I'll adjust the tangencies so that it moves in a more curved manner between the first and second keyframes, and then steeper between the second and third. Now you'll see that it moves in a more curved manner between the first and second keyframes, and then more steeply between the second and third. And that's really all there is to the fundamentals of basic keyframe animation in 3ds Max. Okay, so now I'm going to create some simple animation for the headphones. I could animate any and every part of the headphones, the microphone, the cup groups, the band. But I'm just going to animate the top group node, the headphones group, as if someone was wearing the headphones and dancing along as they listen to music. But if you've chosen a shotgun for your prop, for example, you might animate the forestock and the trigger. If you chose a sword, you might animate it being pulled out of its sheath, and then animate it swinging as if in a sword fight. But virtually any object or element and any parameter can be animated in 3ds Max. I've set my timeline to be 100 frames. Then I'm going to set an initial keyframe for the group, and then use Auto Key to animate the movement and rotation of the headphones group as if the wearer were dancing to the beat of a piece of music. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And this is the process you'll go through to animate your prop or the different elements that make up your prop. Now, rendering takes time, especially rendering image sequences for animated performances. And as your models and textures and scenes grow in complexity and resolution, those render times will only increase. But when you're animating, you're often not concerned about how the materials or textures appear, unless you're animating those textures or materials, which you can do. But most of the time, you're only concerned about the motion and the timing when you're animating. So you can see how your animations will look when they're rendered and played in real time without having to spend the time to render an animation in 3ds Max by creating what's known as a preview animation. A preview animation will create a video that is simply screen caps of every frame of animation. And creating a preview animation is much quicker than rendering. To create a preview, you can either go to the Tools, Preview Grab Viewport menu, and then click on Create Preview Animation. Or you can click on the plus sign in any viewport and go to the Create Preview menu, Create Preview Animation. You can choose whether to use your current timeline or a specific range. So my timeline is from frame 1 to 100, but if I wanted to create a preview of just a specific part of the animation, I could set that custom range here. You can choose which elements you want to be displayed in that preview animation and which ones you don't. I want just my geometry. I don't have any particle systems or bone objects to turn off, but if I did, I could turn those off so that only my geometry is displayed. You can choose which percentage of the render size you have set up in your render setup. And I have mine set to 640 by 480. So 50% of 640 by 480 would be 320 by 240. By default, the preview videos will be saved to the previews folder of your current project directory, or you can specify where you want that file to save. You can choose a specific file name, a type of file, usually AVI or QuickTime. By default, your preview is going to be set to create an AVI, and it will overwrite the same default file every time in your previews folder. And that's handy because you're often creating multiple previews over and over and over again, so there's no reason to save separate files each time. For your submissions for the assignments in the course, you'll want to set the specific file type, file name, and location so that you can find those files and upload them in the classroom. And then you can choose which viewport you want to use. It's going to be set by default to the viewport that you have active when you open up the Make Preview window. But once you have your settings set here, just hit Create. And the file will open up automatically when it's finished. And it just gives you a real-time view of what your animation looks like. And this is the process you'll use to test the motion and the timing of your animated performances so that you can get the keyframes and the timing the way that you want it before you spend the time rendering the final view.